The morning my parents sued me, I was wiping down my kitchen counter. It was just after 8. The kettle had finished boiling, and steam still fogged the edge of the window above the sink. Outside, a delivery truck idled at the curb. Ordinary sounds, ordinary light. My phone buzzed against the laminate. I dried my hands on a dish towel before picking it up. "Have you seen this?" My friend Carla had texted, followed by a screenshot from the county court website. Bennett v. Bennett. Plaintiffs, Laura and Daniel Bennett. Defendant, Caleb Bennett. The subject line listed one number, $5,000. I read it twice, then once more. The tea kettle clicked as it cooled. I turned the stove off even though it was already off. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. The filing alleged undue influence, manipulation of an elderly person, and wrongful acquisition of inheritance. They were my parents. The same two people who signed custody over to my grandfather when I was 12. The same two people who hadn't called me on my birthday in 16 years. I set the phone face down. There was one detail in the filing that made my stomach tighten. A name listed under witnesses. Judge Michael Whitaker. I hadn't expected to see that name connected to anything in my life again. I poured my tea, sat at the small table by the window, watched the delivery truck pull away. Then I opened the court summons. And that's where it began. I live in Cedar Falls now, small city, river on one side. Old brick courthouse downtown with wide stone steps that hold the heat in summer. My grandfather, Thomas Bennett, lived 4 blocks from Lakeshore Park. The house was a faded blue with a sagging porch swing. He took me in when I was 12. I moved in with one duffel bag and a pair of sneakers that were half a size too small. He was 73 then, retired railroad accountant, quiet man, slow walker, always smelled faintly of peppermint and aftershave. My parents told people it was temporary. They told church friends I needed structure. They told co-workers it was a bonding summer. They signed full custody papers 3 weeks after my half-brother was born. I didn't see them again for a long time. Grandpa didn't ask questions. He just cleared a dresser drawer and showed me how to fold my clothes properly. The first night I stayed there, I heard him moving around the kitchen at 2 in the morning. I thought I'd done something wrong. I came out of the guest room and found him at the table with 2 mugs of cocoa. "You looked like you weren't sleeping," he said. That was his style, no big speeches, just presence. Over time, routines formed. Sundays meant church at 9, then Lakeshore Park by noon. We'd bring cracked corn for the ducks because he insisted bread wasn't good for them. He liked rules like that, small, correct details. When he turned 85, his hands started shaking more. By 87, I was driving him everywhere. By 89, I was managing his pill organizer every Monday morning. When he revised his will, he didn't tell me the amount. He just said, "I've put things in order." I nodded. That's what he liked, order. He passed away last fall, peacefully. Early October, the leaves were already starting to turn. At the reading of the will, I learned the amount, $5.3 million. My parents were each left $500,000. My half-brother Ryan was left the same. The rest came to me. There wasn't any yelling at the reading, just tight smiles. My mother's fingers drumming against her purse. 2 months later, the lawsuit arrived. They claimed I isolated him, controlled access, manipulated him while he had dementia. I remember standing in the courthouse hallway on the first hearing date. The air smelled faintly like floor cleaner. Someone down the corridor was laughing too loudly. My mother saw me first. She looked me over slowly. Still wearing discount suits, I see. Her voice carried. She wanted the room to hear. My father adjusted his cufflinks and said, loud enough for the clerk to pause typing, $5 million stolen from your own family. That's what this is. I didn't respond. I just walked past them and into courtroom 2C. Inside, the benches creaked when people shifted. Light filtered through tall windows, catching dust in the air. I sat alone at the defense table. My attorney had withdrawn the week before. I couldn't cover the retainer for extended litigation, so I organized my folders myself. Medical records, visitor logs, custody transfer documents, financial statements, emails. Everything labeled, everything dated. When the bailiff called the room to order, I felt steady. I'd had 16 years of practice at staying steady. Judge Whitaker entered. He glanced at the case file, then at me, and for a moment something in his expression changed, just slightly. Then he said, "Let's begin." And I folded my hands on the table and waited. My mother's attorney stood first, tall man, gray suit, confident posture. He adjusted the microphone like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a straightforward matter of undue influence over a vulnerable elderly man." Straightforward. That word stayed with me. He spoke calmly, carefully. He outlined a version of my life that almost sounded organized, clinical. I had inserted myself into my grandfather's affairs. I had restricted family access. I had assumed financial control during cognitive decline. I kept my eyes on my legal pad. The courtroom had that quiet hum old buildings have, air vents breathing, someone clearing their throat, the soft scratch of a pen from the court reporter. My father sat upright, hands folded. My mother nodded at appropriate moments, practiced expressions, concerned, injured. When it was their turn to testify, they described sacrifice. They adopted me at 4. They did their best. I had behavioral difficulties. When my half-brother was born, they said I became jealous. The word jealous hung in the room. I wrote it down, underlined it once. My father testified that my grandfather had shown signs of confusion years before the will revision, that I managed the household, that I screened phone calls. He didn't mention that he hadn't called in over a decade. When Judge Whitaker asked when they had last physically visited my grandfather before he entered assisted living, my father hesitated. "I don't recall the exact date." The judge flipped a page. "The visitor log indicates 2 visits in 5 years prior to assisted living. Does that refresh your memory?" There was a small pause. "Yes," my father said. The attorney shifted quickly, redirecting the narrative toward medical capacity. They presented a report from a consulting psychologist, a man who had reviewed records posthumously and suggested possible diminished executive function. Possible. That word, too, went into my notes. When court recessed for lunch, I stepped into the hallway. The courthouse cafeteria smelled faintly of burnt coffee. I didn't go in. I stood by a tall window overlooking Main Street. Cars moved slowly through the intersection below. My phone buzzed once. Unknown number. "You don't deserve any of it." I read it. Then I put the phone face down. Grandpa used to say silence is still a decision. I went back inside when the bailiff called the room again. In the afternoon session, it was my turn. I stood slowly. I didn't walk to the center dramatically. I stayed near my table. I'd organized everything within reach. "Your Honor," I said, "I'll start with documentation." I handed the bailiff a thin folder. Inside were the custody transfer papers signed when I was 12. Full legal guardianship transferred to Thomas Bennett. Language clear, permanent. Financial responsibility relinquished. Judge Whitaker read it carefully. No expression. I continued. Next, medical records from Dr. Elena Morris, my grandfather's primary physician for 24 years. 6-month cognitive evaluations. Notations of mild vascular changes 3 years before death. Clear statements of legal competence at the time of will revision. I let the documents speak. No commentary. Then visitor logs. Assisted living facility, 6 months prior to his passing. Out of 184 days, I was logged in 176 times. My parents, 3 visits total. My half-brother, 0. The courtroom was very still at that point. Paperwork makes things quiet. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge. He updated his will 2 years before he died, I said. At that time, he was evaluated as fully competent. I slid forward a notarized statement from his estate attorney confirming that fact. The opposing counsel objected briefly, but the judge overruled. Then I stopped. I didn't argue morality. I didn't defend myself emotionally. I let the dates line up. 16 years of tax filings listing me as his dependent until I turned 18. 16 years of school records listing my grandfather as emergency contact. 16 years of documented medical appointment attendance. Facts are quiet. When I finished, I sat down. Judge Whitaker leaned back in his chair. He removed his glasses for a moment and folded them carefully. Then he looked directly at me. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "did you take your grandfather to Lakeshore Park on Sundays?" The question surprised me. "Yes, Your Honor." "What did you feed the ducks?" "Cracked corn," I said, "from the feed store on Elm Street." There was a slight shift in the room. "And during the heavy rainstorm last April," he continued, "did something occur near the gazebo?" My pulse slowed, oddly. "Yes," I said. "His wheelchair got stuck in the mud. I carried him under the shelter until the rain passed." The judge nodded once. Then he folded his hands on the bench. And something in the atmosphere changed. Not dramatic, just clearer. He looked at my parents for a long moment. Then he said very evenly, "Before I proceed, I need to address something for the record." And the room went completely still. Judge Whitaker rested his hands on the bench. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "For transparency," he said, "I need to disclose that I have personally observed interactions between the defendant and Mr. Thomas Bennett over the past 3 years." The opposing attorney stood immediately. "Your Honor." The judge lifted one hand. Calm, measured. "I played chess at Lakeshore Park on Sunday afternoons, weather permitting." The room settled again. "For 3 years," he continued, "I saw a young man bring an elderly gentleman in a wheelchair to the duck pond. I saw him read aloud. I saw him adjust a blanket. I saw him wait while the gentleman fed ducks, even when it took time." He paused. "I never once saw the plaintiffs present during those afternoons." No accusation, just a statement. My mother shifted in her seat. My father's jaw tightened. The judge continued, "I will not recuse myself at this stage. My observations support documentation already entered into the record." That was the first shift. It wasn't loud. It was structural. From that moment, the narrative changed from allegation to verification. The opposing counsel pivoted quickly, pressing again on cognitive decline. "Your Honor, dementia can fluctuate. Influence can be subtle." "Yes," Judge Whitaker said, "which is why documentation matters." He looked down at the physician's evaluations again, then at the estate attorney's affidavit, then at the timeline of the will revision. He turned a page slowly. "Mr. Bennett," he said to me, "did you manage your grandfather's finances?" "I assisted with bill payments online once his arthritis made writing checks difficult." "Were you a co-signer on his accounts?" "No." "Power of attorney?" "Yes, medical only, granted 2 years before his passing." "The paperwork for that was already submitted, dated, witnessed, filed properly, step by step." The opposing attorney tried another angle. "Isn't it true you limited contact between Mr. Bennett and his daughter?" I answered without raising my voice. "My grandfather changed his locks himself after an incident involving alcohol at his birthday gathering. I have the locksmith invoice dated May 12, 2017. I handed it forward. Paper speaks evenly. "And did you prevent visits?" "No. The assisted living facility maintains visitor logs. Those were submitted." Silence followed. The courtroom air felt different now, less speculative. Judge Whitaker leaned forward slightly. "Counsel," he said to the plaintiff's attorney, "your claim hinges on undue influence. Do you have direct evidence of coercion?" There was a brief consultation at their table. A whisper. "Circumstantial evidence, Your Honor." Circumstantial evidence does not override documented competency. That was the second shift. Clear, procedural. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I simply turned a page on my legal pad and wrote the next heading: Timeline Confirmation. When my turn resumed, I organized my points clearly. Step 1, I said, establish legal abandonment. I referenced the signed custody transfer. Step 2, establish documented presence. Visitor logs, appointment records, tax documents. Step 3, establish legal competency at time of will revision, physician evaluation, estate attorney testimony. I kept my tone steady. No emotion layered on top, just order. My mother suddenly spoke without being prompted. He isolated my father. Judge Whitaker looked at her. "Ma'am, this is not an open discussion. You will speak through counsel." She sat back. My father leaned toward his attorney, frustration visible now. Emotional reactions often surface when structure holds. I finished my summary and sat down. The judge reviewed his notes quietly for several minutes. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Finally he spoke. "Based on the documentation presented, I am prepared to rule." The attorney for my parents stood again. "Your Honor, we request a recess before ruling." Denied. Another shift. The judge adjusted his glasses. "In matters of estate law," he began, "intent and capacity govern. Documentation here supports both." He turned slightly toward my parents. "Additionally, the court cannot ignore the extended absence of meaningful relationship between the plaintiffs and the decedent." He paused, letting the language settle. "The motion to invalidate the will on grounds of undue influence is denied." The sound of the gavel was not loud, but it carried. "Further," he continued, "given the baseless nature of the claim and the defendant's necessity to represent himself, plaintiffs are ordered to pay court costs and $40,000 in legal compensation." My mother inhaled sharply. My father stood halfway, then stopped. I remained seated, hands folded. The judge closed the file. "Court is adjourned." That was the ruling. But the real shift wasn't the decision. It was the quiet recognition that the system had worked exactly as designed when documentation, patience, and presence aligned. I gathered my folders slowly. And that's when my mother stepped directly into my path near the aisle. Her voice was no longer composed. "This isn't over," she said. I looked at her calmly, and for the first time in 16 years, I answered without hesitation. "Actually," I said, "it is." Then I waited. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for something. Anger, fear, maybe guilt. I didn't offer any of it. My father joined her near the aisle. His face was tight, controlled, but the edges were slipping. "We're appealing," he said. "You won on technicalities." I nodded once. "That's your right." No challenge, no argument, just acknowledgement. They seemed unsettled by that. People expect resistance when they're preparing for a fight. I picked up my folders and stepped around them. The hallway outside courtroom 2C smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Afternoon light angled through the tall windows. Halfway down the corridor, I stopped. There was one more thing that needed to be handled properly, not emotionally, procedurally. I walked to the clerk's office and requested certified copies of the ruling and fee order. I paid for expedited documentation. Step 1, secure official record. Step 2, forward documentation to estate attorney for protective filing. Step 3, initiate trust allocation under grandfather's original instruction. I didn't rush. I drove home slowly. Traffic was light. A radio host was discussing local zoning changes. Ordinary things. When I got home, I made tea again. Same kettle, same window. The house felt quiet in a steady way. Then I opened the binder. Grandpa and I had assembled 2 years before his passing. He'd insisted on organization. "Paper beats noise," he used to say. Inside the binder, original will and revisions, physician competency certifications, power of attorney documentation, bank account authorizations, property deed records, audio recording transcript from final estate meeting. That last one had been his idea. The estate attorney had suggested recording the will discussion for clarity. Grandpa agreed. I'd never listened to it fully, until that afternoon. I placed my phone on the table, pressed play. His voice came through older, thinner, but unmistakably clear. "I am of sound mind," he said during the recording. "I am choosing to leave the majority of my estate to Caleb, because he has been present in my life. This decision is not influenced by coercion." He even laughed lightly during the meeting. "I suppose this will upset Laura," he added, referencing my mother by name. But I made peace with that years ago. There was no confusion in his tone, no hesitation. I saved the audio file to 3 separate storage drives. Step 4. Redundancy. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This isn't finished. I didn't respond. Silence is sometimes the cleanest boundary. 2 days later, the notice of appeal was filed. It wasn't unexpected. The appeal focused on alleged judicial bias due to personal observation. The irony was quiet. The appellate process is procedural, structured, slower, no theatrics, no emotional testimony, just transcripts, records, precedent. My response brief was simple, concise, supported by case law cited directly from state inheritance statutes. Undue influence requires evidence of coercion combined with incapacity. Neither existed. The appeals hearing took place 3 months later. Different courthouse, 3-judge panel, smaller room, cooler lighting. My parents' attorney argued conflict of interest. The panel asked one question repeatedly. Does the record support legal competency at the time of execution? Every answer returned to documentation. Medical certification, attorney affidavit, audio transcript. No speculation, no raised voices. The appellate court reserved ruling. Then I waited. Waiting is active. I went back to work during that time. I was finishing my degree in social services, taking night classes, continuing my job at the hardware store. Routine keeps you grounded when systems are moving in the background. 6 weeks later, the decision arrived. Affirmed. Trial court ruling upheld. Fee award sustained. The language was precise. The plaintiff's absence of meaningful relationship over a prolonged period undermines claims of undue influence. There it was. Not emotional, legal. I printed the ruling and placed it in the binder. Then I closed it. That evening I drove to Lakeshore Park. It was early spring again. Ducks gathered near the edge of the water. A few older men were playing chess at the tables. I brought cracked corn. I sat on the same bench Grandpa used to prefer. The air smelled faintly of river water and cut grass. A familiar voice spoke behind me. Looks like it held up. I turned. Judge Whitaker, retired now, stood with a thermos in hand. Yes, sir, I said. It did. He nodded. Documentation tends to. We didn't talk about the case after that. We talked about weather patterns, about a new coffee shop on Elm Street. Simple things. After a while, he moved toward the chess tables. I stayed by the pond, watched the ducks, watched the sunlight move across the water. My phone buzzed once more. Unknown number, again. You think you're better than us now. I read it. Then I put the phone face down and fed the ducks. Then I waited. The final confrontation didn't happen in court. It happened in a conference room at my grandfather's former bank. Neutral space, glass walls, long oak table, soft hum of recessed lighting. They had requested mediation regarding the fee payment. I agreed, not because I wanted to negotiate, because I wanted the record clean. My parents arrived first. My mother's posture was rigid. My father carried a leather folder under his arm. I sat across from them, hands folded, one notebook in front of me. The mediator, an older woman with silver hair and steady eyes, outlined the purpose of the meeting. Resolution of outstanding court-ordered fees, she said calmly. My father leaned forward first. We're willing to settle for a reduced amount, he began. 40,000 is excessive. I opened my notebook, page 1, court order, signed, sealed. Payment is due in full within 30 days, I said evenly. My mother interjected. You don't need the money. I let that sentence sit in the air for a moment. This isn't about need, I replied. It's about compliance. No accusation, no explanation, just structure. The mediator nodded slightly. My father shifted tactics. You know this makes things harder long term. I understood what he meant. Extended family gatherings, social circles, narrative control. I kept my tone steady. I'm not seeking long-term engagement. Silence followed. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her bracelet. We were overwhelmed, she said suddenly. You were difficult. We had a newborn. The mediator glanced at me, giving space if I wanted to respond emotionally. I didn't. I opened the binder I'd brought. Page 2, custody transfer agreement. Signed, notarized, dated. We no longer wish to provide care or financial support. I turned the binder toward them. "This document is clear," I said. "No anger, just clarity." My father exhaled sharply. "We thought your grandfather would fix things." "He did," I answered. The mediator maintained her calm posture. "Let's focus on the present obligation. There are moments when confrontation isn't about raising your voice. It's about refusing to let the frame shift." My parents attempted one last approach. "Release the fee judgment," my mother said quietly. "We'll consider this finished." I closed the binder. "It is finished," I said. "The appeal is closed. The ruling stands. Payment is not negotiable." I slid a prepared document across the table. Bank wiring instructions. Structured. Precise. The mediator reviewed it. "This reflects the court's order accurately," she confirmed. My father's jaw tightened again. "You're enjoying this?" I met his eyes calmly. No. That was true. There was no satisfaction in it, just resolution. The mediator ended the session with a deadline reminder. Outside the bank, the air felt cool and still. My phone buzzed 10 days later. Incoming wire confirmation. $40,000. I printed the confirmation and filed it in the binder. Step 1. Confirm receipt. Step 2. Allocate according to trust plan. Step 3. Close ledger. I transferred the fee award into the educational trust I had established 2 months earlier. My grandfather's original estate plan had included a charitable portion. We had discussed it at length during his final year. He wanted something practical. "Help someone who doesn't have backup," he'd said. So the funds went toward that. Not dramatic, just aligned. That same week I received a voicemail. It was my half-brother. Ryan's voice was softer than I remembered. "I don't agree with what they did," he said. I didn't know how to step in." I listened to the message twice. Then I returned the call. We met at a coffee shop on Maple Avenue, neutral ground again. He looked younger than his 20 years. Nervous hands, avoiding eye contact at first. "I never went to the park," he said quietly. "I didn't know." I nodded. "That's not something you can change," I replied. He swallowed. Are you done with them?" "Yes." No bitterness in it, just boundary. He nodded slowly. "I'm trying to figure things out," he added. "I know," I said. We talked for an hour, mostly about school, about work, about small things, no accusations. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "I'm glad it went the way it did," he said. "So am I answered, and I meant it. Not because of the money, because the record was clear, because reality had been defined in writing. That evening, I walked through my house, 3 bedrooms, modest, quiet, 4 blocks from where my grandfather used to live. I straightened a stack of mail on the entry table, wiped down the kitchen counter again, then I sat at the table with a cup of tea. No noise, no argument, just order. And outside, somewhere near the river, ducks were settling in for the night. Then I waited. The appellate ruling became final 30 days after issuance. No further filings, no emergency motions, just a stamped confirmation from the clerk's office. Case closed. I picked up the certified copy myself. The courthouse steps were warm under the afternoon sun. A couple stood near the entrance arguing quietly over parking validation. Life moves on quickly around legal endings. Inside, the clerk handed me the envelope through the small glass window. "Everything's finalized," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." That was it. No music, no applause, just paperwork. I drove straight to the bank. The estate account had already been settled months earlier, but I wanted the final notation added to the ledger. Clean books matter. The bank manager reviewed the documents, typed steadily, then printed an updated statement. "All clear," he said. "No outstanding claims." I signed where indicated. That signature felt different from the ones in court. This one was not defensive, it was administrative. After that, I met with the estate attorney one last time. He was older than when I first met him, or maybe he just looked that way now that everything was over. "You handled this properly," he said. "I followed the documents," I replied. He smiled slightly. "Most people don't." We closed the file together. He slid the thick folder into a labeled archive box. Thomas Bennett, estate complete. I watched him seal it. Outside his office, the late afternoon air felt steady and mild. Not dramatic, just calm. Over the next few months, small practical decisions replaced legal ones. I finished my bachelor's degree, enrolled in a graduate program focused on foster care advocacy, moved part of the estate into long-term investments with low volatility, kept the house simple, 3 bedrooms, neutral walls, second-hand dining table. The porch swing I installed myself. On Sundays, I continued going to Lakeshore Park. Same routine. Church at 9. Feed store on Elm for cracked corn. Park bench near the gazebo. The chess tables stayed busy. Retirees arguing over bishops and rooks. Joggers passing through. Sometimes Judge Whitaker was there, though we never mentioned the case again. Once, after a quiet chess match, he said, "Systems work when people keep records." I nodded. Grandpa would have agreed. One afternoon in early fall, about a year after the lawsuit ended, a young man approached me near the pond. Mid-20s, worn backpack, tired posture. "Are you Caleb?" he asked. "Yes, I read about your case. My aunt's trying to claim my grandmother's house. She says I pressured her into changing the deed." He looked exhausted. I recognized the look. "Do you have documentation?" I asked. "Some," he said. "Start there," I replied. "Get medical records, get attorney statements, build a timeline." He nodded slowly. "Don't argue," I added. "Organize." He exhaled like someone who'd been holding breath for weeks. "Thank you," he said. I watched him walk away. The ducks gathered near the edge of the water again. The sun moved slowly across the surface. There's something steady about patterns that repeat. The final confirmation from the appellate court still sits in the binder on my bookshelf. I don't open it often. I don't need to. The resolution wasn't about proving something to my parents. It was about clarity. They stopped contacting me after the appeal failed. No more unknown numbers. No more warnings. Silence returned, and silence, when chosen, feels different than silence imposed. One evening, I found an old voicemail from my grandfather saved on an external drive. I hadn't listened to it in months. "Just calling to remind you," his voice said softly, "the ducks expect us on Sunday." I smiled at that. The system had worked, documentation had spoken, boundaries had held. The inheritance was never really about $5 million. It was about 16 years of presence recorded in quiet ways. Visitor logs, doctor appointments, Sunday afternoons. Those things are harder to fake and easier to prove. That winter, I refinanced part of the estate into a small nonprofit initiative supporting teenagers aging out of foster care. Nothing flashy. Scholarship assistance, legal consultation hours, transportation stipends, paperwork. Always paperwork. The first student we helped wrote me a short note. "Thank you for showing up." I folded it and placed it inside the binder. Then I closed it. Outside, snow fell softly against the window. The house stayed quiet. Ordered. Complete. Then I waited. This morning, I woke up before my alarm. The house was quiet in that soft way it gets just before sunrise. The heater clicked on. The pipes shifted faintly in the walls. I lay there for a minute, listening. Then I got up and made coffee. Same kettle, same counter, same small scratch on the laminate near the sink. I wiped it down with a cloth out of habit. Some routines don't change, even when everything else does. On the bookshelf in the living room, the estate binder sits between 2 framed photos. One of my graduation. One of Grandpa at the duck pond, wrapped in his gray blanket, sunlight on his face. The binder hasn't moved in months. It doesn't need to. The court records are sealed. The fees were paid. The appeals ended. The accounts are balanced. My parents haven't contacted me in over a year. Ryan sends a text occasionally, mostly about school. Once about a job interview. We keep it simple. No history discussions. Just present tense. That feels right. After breakfast, I walked to the park. Cold air, thin sunlight. The river low this time of year. A few ducks clustered near the water's edge, waiting the way they always do. I poured cracked corn slowly into my palm. They stepped closer. Across the path, two older men were already arguing over a chessboard. One of them glanced up and nodded at me. I nodded back. There's comfort in repetition. I sat on the same bench Grandpa preferred, listened to the small sounds, water shifting, pieces clicking against wood, distant traffic fading into background noise, nothing dramatic, just steady. I don't think about the lawsuit often anymore. When I do, it feels less like a battle and more like a process that had to finish itself. The documents were clear. The timeline was clear. The system responded accordingly. And when it was over, I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. There's a difference. Last week, I received an email from a woman in another state. She had found a short article about the case online. Her message was careful, measured. My adoptive parents are asking me to co-sign loans I can't afford, she wrote. They say I owe them. I don't know what's fair anymore. I read it twice. Then I replied the only way I know how. Start with documentation. Know what's in writing. Know what's yours to carry and what isn't. No long speech, just structure, because sometimes the most stable thing you can offer someone is order. The ducks finished the corn in my hand. I brushed the leftover dust from my fingers onto the bench. A jogger passed. Someone laughed near the playground. The world doesn't pause for personal endings. It just keeps moving. I stood up slowly, looked once at the water. Then I walked back toward the path. Before I go, if you've been listening quietly with me, I'm glad you stayed. If this story resonated with you, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this community grow in a steady way. And I'd really like to know, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? I read those comments more often than you might think. 2 other stories are waiting for you next. They're calm, real, and worth your time. Until then, take care of your records, and take care of your peace.